Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, thank you for being with us today as our co-host.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. We are still remote. We are still under a winter wonderland here.
Yeah, I thought by now we'd be coming out of that. But I'm still, a little bit hacked off about all the promise of warming climates, because that's what I was expecting, and I have to worry about my fruit trees and everything else. So I think they fibbed to us, or lied to us, or they don't know any better, or all three. But anyway, we don't have any warm weather, and I find it rather ironic that economically speaking, Florida's doing quite well. As far as obedience to the crazy people, they're doing quite well too. They're going they're alone, and right now they have perfect weather, and they say the beaches are full. So I'm not thinking about moving, but I'm just a little envious for walking on the beach in the sunshine. But it will come soon. But in the meantime, we are going to talk about somebody else that's in the news again. We've talked about them a whole lot in relationship to vaccines, and that is Bill Gates. He tends to be classified in my terminology as a nuisance, and somebody who can create havoc and has misled a lot of people. And of course, that's related to the lockdowns and the vaccines and how he's going to police the world, how he believes in government, how he can control finances, all through these things. But he was in the news here yesterday or the day before, and it's a new thing. We saw in the newspaper that he's buying up a lot of farmland, but now he doesn't like cows. So if you're rich, and I don't know who the rich people are, the rich countries like America, that the solution to climate problems, and I don't know how long it'll take to warm up Texas, but he said that everybody should eat artificial meat. And he knows how to make it. He knows how to grow it. Maybe, that's why he's buying all this farmland, the biggest farmland owner, maybe in the world, especially in the United States. So he wants to make meat out of that. And I think they've tried a little bit of that. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think it worked too well. And I'm not a great meat eater, but I don't even want to try the fake meat. I want to just get a better chef if I don't like what I'm eating. But he takes this seriously, and there's a lot of motivation. We have a few comments that we've looked at from Robert Kennedy, who's an expert on this, and also Robert Kennedy considers himself a real strict, honest environmentalist, and he would probably do things that we wouldn't agree with, but he's a trustworthy person, and he's bewildered a little bit because his fellow environmentalists, who are the more honest type, won't say a word about Bill Gates. So today I want to talk a little bit about Bill Gates and whether or not we can influence that debate at all. In other words, I think it's a mess what he's doing, and I don't know exactly how we're going to shift the attitude about this. But it might be the meat issue. Who knows? Maybe the political alliance that we need are people who like hamburgers, and maybe we can galvanize a little bit of support for our position.
Maybe we'll start the Hamburger party as a third party. But he's got a new book out, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, the Solutions We Have and the Breakthroughs We Need. And the thing about Bill Gates is, as the fourth wealthiest person in the world, he has the ability to move very large things. And we know this, as you say, for the fact that he owns, I think, 250,000 acres in the United States, massive purchase of farmland across the U.S. And as you say, he did make some headlines the other day by saying that basically the wealthiest countries should be eating fake meat. And it's kind of an authoritarianism that he has, because when there's a little pushback, he said, quote, "You can get used to the taste difference. Basically, you don't have a choice. just get used to it. Eat that plant-based burger. And but as for Gates, he admitted, yeah, he likes to have a real hamburger now and then. And he tells us we need to have zero carbon emissions, but he does ride around in his own private plane. He doesn't take the metro to get where he needs to go. So I think as with the COVID thing, Dr. Paul, I think some of this is going to go our way because of the hypocrisy of our overlords. Of these people have said that he has a Napoleon complex, something like that. He has an authoritarianism complex, but it is troubling when someone tells you what you can and can't eat in the future, and they have the money to enforce it. You know.
Yes. You know, the way I see the problem philosophically is that he falls into the category of being an authoritarian that's very rich, and he's very bold and commands respect because he's well known. He owns most of the media that has to report on him, and he's pictured as a humanitarian to some degree. Actually, there's more questions being raised about that. But it's authoritarianism in principle that is big issue, because although he benefited tremendously as he earned a lot of money because there was not a total libertarian free market society that he had to work in, it was still freer than anything else in the world and throughout most of history. So he was able to capitalize on some relative freedom and also, you know, some special deals and things like that. So he did very well. But the question has never been, you know, coined the way I think it should be. The authoritarianism versus the liberty effort. And he obviously is a out and out authoritarian, and he's rich and he's creative, and I think it's continuing now on what he's doing. Where the alternative to how do you solve the problem of hunger around the world? Is it by imposing a system on them that really doesn't work for these other countries, or is it putting an effort into spreading the message of liberty, private property, contracts, you know, all the things that we talk about? Because I think that's where we really lose the fight. Not that we lose the intellectual fight, but that we don't have the resources, even though I still contend that our numbers are growing. But it's also the opposition. The authoritarians are, you know, overwhelmingly in charge. And as conditions get worse, the temptation for the people will always be to demand more authoritarianism, even though the answers are out there. And I think that's what's happening. So people don't pay that much attention to Gates, unfortunately. But if they did, I imagine we might even hear more from our libertarian free market friends. But so many people they claim they speak for the free market, but they're only speaking for another variety of authoritarianism, another variety of interventionism, where the government is always intervening and not letting free people make their own decisions for what they think is best.
Yeah, and you mentioned the media earlier, and this is a piece that Lou Rockwell has on his site today, written by RFK Jr., and he points out that Gates has made $20 billion from this lockdown, a lockdown that he has cheerled and previously wargamed. But the other thing that Robert Kennedy writes about, and it's written about in a lot of other places, is how much money Gates gives to the media. And I read one of the articles I read said, you know, basically he did not have that great of a reputation in the media a few years ago. He was kind of looked at as a nerd and as kind of a pain. And then he started giving millions of dollars. And in fact, he has given recently $250 million to different press outlets: BBC, NBC, Al Jazeera, ProPublica, National Journal, Univision, Medium, Financial Times, The Atlantic, the Texas Tribune, Gannett, Washington Monthly, Le Monde, and Center for Investigative Reporting. He also gives a lot to PBS and NPR. What happens with all these millions of dollars? Well, it's purchased him a lot of very good press, a lot of good media, a lot of fawning stories. He basically owns The Guardian, which used to be a fierce independent paper. But the other thing that's really scary, Dr. Paul, when you want to talk about debate, is he gives a ton of money to these so-called fact checker organizations like PolitiFact. He's given them a ton of money. So basically, he has his own agenda on vaccines, on the environment, on the viruses. And if you publish an article that goes against it differently, then you'll have PolitiFact. And this has actually happened to us recently. PolitiFact will come out and say, this is misinformation, this is misleading, this is wrong, this is a conspiracy theory. In fact, we got some criticism from PolitiFact for an article that we published at RPI, Ron Paul Institute. Basically, well, actually, it was something that we did on the show. We talked about CDC saying you need to wear 2 masks. And so PolitiFact, or one of these fact organizations, came out and said, that's totally not true, when in fact, I'm looking at the article right now, the CDC says wear 2 masks. So Gates can subsidize the truth seekers, so-called truth seekers, but nobody's going to ask who guards the guards, who guards the guardians, who's watching the watchers. And that's something that's very disturbing and should be threatening to everyone who wants to have a full debate rather than someone who says, okay, Bill Gates has all the answers, everyone else shut up. That's pretty dangerous, I think.
Yeah, and I think what they represent, Gates and people like Bezos, is they represent a modification of the deep state. They now control the bold state. They're not hiding behind the scenes. Who belongs? Who does this controlling stuff? Well, I think it's out in the open who really is. And it's not just the ordinary media that you mentioned where he donates to, but the social media. They have a lot to say about what comes out of social media, and that's where the censors are coming from. And also the universities, they get involved in the universities as well. And so it's controlling the message. If they can control that, and they control and destroy completely and totally the First Amendment, it really wipes out the strongest weapon that we have. Just speaking truth to power, they talk about. And I think that doesn't mean that we have to shy away. I think that's the strongest weapon we still have. And I think we like to point out at times when the hypocrisy comes through, and there is a lot. It's not hard to find it. So that is what we have to do. But I definitely think this is a shift. It's a real boldness on their part, and the evidence is pretty strong on how very, very powerful and rich they are.
And it's good that you mentioned the nonprofit and the social media, because as you know, Facebook and a few of the social media outlets said, we will take down from the page and give you warnings if you post anything that goes against the directions of the World Health Organization, the WHO. So that means whatever they say goes. But here's something from Robert Kennedy's article today. He says, as its largest contributor, Gates controls the World Health Organization, which, according to Foreign Affairs, it's an article in Foreign Affairs magazine, quote, makes no significant decision without consulting the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So he's the biggest donor to the WHO. They don't make any big decisions without consulting with him. And if you say anything against them, you get taken down from social media. That is raw power, and it's being exercised in a very aggressive fashion, and it's being used to silence debate.
And they're not bashful about trying to silence Robert Kennedy either, which they, partially have hit him. But, in some ways, he might be getting more attention right now, and that's why we hope that there's going to be an alternative. I see that Parler's working hard to have an alternative and somebody that can fight back, the other sources. But that takes time and energy and some smart people and also investments to make too. But I think there's a lot of motivation out there to see a fair shake on the distribution of information. That we're obviously in that category in the minority. But I still work on the assumption that the views of liberty are very, very popular when people know exactly what they're dealing with and know the difference, and not being bamboozled by the media. That's why, and Gates understands this, and Bezos understand that controlling the media is a big, big deal. And of course, they're now, I guess, if you added both their wealth, and this almost comes across resenting people who are wealthy, but obviously this is a little bit different. The two of them probably have more wealth in hundreds of countries or more. There's not probably 30 or 40 countries that would be richer than these guys. It's just huge, and it wasn't earned by strictly providing a good service honestly and in a free market economy. And right now, of course, we know that the fact that there are drugs that we didn't mention directly, but they, Gates, everybody knows he's involved with production of drugs and medicines and vaccines. But they're also involved in making sure that if there's a drug that's been around for 50 years, and a lot of physicians who practice independent medicine and believe in it and understand how it works a lot better than the shenanigans that go in some of our laboratories, and they think it's worthwhile, they go out of their way to badmouth those drugs. And that to me is another affront. And yet that is a tough one because people want to believe. Who are we going to trust? If the government doesn't tell us that this drug is safe, and who's going to really monitor and reassure us about the vaccines? Well, hopefully that the message that especially Robert Kennedy is trying to get out, at least stop and listen. He has his firm opinion. And what I like about him, he's not like, this is it. The radical greenies and the radical Marxist type liberals, you can't even talk to them. And that is the problem. If we would just open up the doors to an honest discussion and not put up with this stuff that, even the good drugs get canceled, and there's no debate, no discussion. That to me is really where the great danger is.
It is, and hopefully, his own tone deafness might start making people think twice about what he says. This week he's told the people in the UK, you're going to have to all give up your cars. And if you do have a car, you have to have an electric car. Well, not all people are doing as well as he is. People are struggling actually, particularly with the lockdowns costing, I think, 100,000 businesses in the U.S. alone have closed. Billions of dollars have been lost. People are facing famine in Africa and elsewhere because of the lockdowns, not the virus. So people are doing a lot worse this year than they were a year and a half ago. And he's telling them all, you need to buy $50,000 electric cars. I think people are going to stop and say, something is fishy about this whole thing, and let's hope they do start questioning it.
We've had the virus and the lockdown, and this gave an excuse for the authoritarians to march in and control us, and they continue to do that. But they also want to make sure that people are intimidated, and now we're having bad weather trouble. It's bad in Texas, but it's bad all around. And now the issue that's coming up, and I want to deal some more with this issue, and that is why is it that the people who are annoyed by this, and people they see this as a problem, and they use weather as a thing, but they won't ask the question. I saw some liberal asking a conservative, well, what about? Don't you think the controls on windmills and solar had something to do with having maybe too much of this and not enough of the other? They get hysterical over that because that is a part. No, they cannot let that happen. That it could be possibly government mismanaged that happened to cause Texas to put too many windmills out there, while at the same time they're burning off natural gas, which is about as clean as you can get. So it's back to understanding private property and honesty and liberty and who makes these decisions, and reduce the scope of not only the deep state, but we got to reduce the power of the bold state right now, because it's the boldness of Bill Gates and Bezos that we have to be concerned about.
Yeah, and it's funny, this actually ties in the issue of using of the so-called green energy, and particularly in Texas. One of the things that's interesting, that the people that are the most enthusiastic supporters of this, we got to fight climate change, they're the ones who actually are on the payroll. And I was reading those news outlets that get money from Gates, and one of them is the Texas Tribune. I just happened to be looking at headlines this morning, and they had an article up. No, it's don't blame alternative energy for Texas's problems. Don't you dare do that. It's not true. It's not true. Don't politicize this crisis. They really are scrambling, and actually, even our governor, he is now feeling the heat. And Governor Abbott said, "Don't blame me. It's all these greenies. It's Alexandria Cortez. It's the New Deal." It's kind of funny because I'm just looking at an article from earlier this month, February 9th, where Greg Abbott was given the Global Energy Wind Leadership Award, recognizing commitment to wind development. So here we go. Abbott once again blaming alternative sources. He's the one responsible for bringing in a lot of these windmills that are now not functioning properly and causing half of Texas to freeze. So there's plenty of hypocrisy to go around.
That's not quite as bad as Cuomo getting an award for managing COVID and taking care of COVID patients in nursing homes. That one has to be worse. But there's one impeachment going on in California, or recall, and now others are talking about maybe we need one at each end. Because it's good that there's recall, because if you wait four years to have the election roll around, it might be so much made worse that there's not much we can do. So anyway, I think that this is these are some tough times, but it's the old saying: "Don't ever let a crisis go to waste." And boy, do they jump at it. And then it gets hard. Sometimes it is 100% natural. You can have natural changes, but they still turn that into a political event, and that's the problem. I think we'll go ahead and close. Daniel, do you want to have a little closing statement for us?
Well, my only statement would be unfortunately we're still quote under the weather here, but we hope we'll be back in the studio to have a normal show soon. And we want to thank everyone, and we appreciate everyone for being patient with the situation down here.
Very good, Daniel. It's good to have you again today. And I want to thank our viewers and our listeners for tuning into the Liberty Report, because we depend on you for support, and we depend on you to help us spread a message, more importantly now than ever. And don't get too despondent about things, because I do believe that there is an impact. And one of the techniques that we're using is when a leader, a politician, or some type of public promoter is inconsistent, says one thing and does something else, and they're in office, believe me, it's a powerful message to say, you said this. And we've been able to point some things out now, like the governor of California. Many people pointed out how inconsistent he was, and that is happening. So whenever you get an issue like that, where the politician says one thing and does something else, point it out. It's a good way to change people's minds. But I want to thank all the viewers today for tuning in. Please come back soon to the Liberty Report.